Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
Hey, welcome back to another exciting and particularly unique episode of Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. With me today is the team from Lunar. Lunar, hello. Welcome to Bad Jew.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having us.
Of course. No, it's really a treat. And so this is also a wonderful challenge for me as a content creator. I've, long form podcasts have never interviewed this many people at once before. So this is really exciting, and we're going to do our best to be economic with time, productive, but still be exciting and, engaging for the listenership. And I'm just really excited. So thank you all for the opportunity. Normally on the Bad Jew podcast, we do the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. Instead, we're going to do 1-minute Bad Jew challenges where you tell your life story in 1 minute. We're putting on extra heat for each and every one of you. Who wants to go first?
I think our fearless executive.
I'm going to say I can model. Yeah, I'm happy to go first.
Excellent. And
Should I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. My name is Maryam. I use she, her pronouns. I was born and raised in New York to a white Ashkenazi mother and an Indian Muslim father who brought me up in both of their faiths, cultures, and religions, which is something that I really love. Growing up, I had a background in democratic politics and also theater, did a little bit of both. And I came to Lunar in between jobs and was really just struck by the fact that there was a community for Asian Jews. I didn't really know any other Asian Jews. Growing up, my life felt like very 50-50, that I was like a New York Jew in New York and then an Indian Muslim in India. And really coming together at Lunar was where I was able to synthesize my identities. I started off as their community organizer, became director of community engagement, and now I'm the executive director, which is something that I really love. So
Awesome. Well done. You nailed that.
yes.
David, how about you next?
So I am born similar to Maryam. I'm a product of an interfaith, interracial relationship. My mom comes from a long line of Lithuanian Jews. She's like a third generation or second generation American Litvak. And my dad is an immigrant from Hong Kong who practiced probably a number of different, in China, there's not really a sense that you're this religion or that religion. So Buddhism, Taoism, a lot of, these practices of when he was growing up. I was a screenwriter and still am for a number of years out in Hollywood. I got involved with a Jewish storytelling theater company called The Braid, which you might be familiar with. I was in their Next Emerging Artist cohort with you, Chaz. And right before, and we thought it was going to be a normal year, and then it turned out to be it was 2020, so we had to reinvent doing theater on Zoom, which turned out to be a huge business model for The Braid, and I ended up joining them full time as a staff member, and I also am in the same time. I remember there was a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. I reached out to my friend David Chiu, who is also an Asian Jew. And I said, Davi, I want to do something at my synagogue. And she's also the former president of Beth Hadashim synagogue, about maybe we could do a joint event on anti-Asian hate crimes. And she said, oh, have you heard of Lunar? And I said, no, I hadn't heard of Lunar. And then it turned out there was this incredible film project all about Asian Jews. And then we brought the speakers there to come and speak. This is actually even separate from the anti-Asian hate crimes event about just actually something more joyful about the combination of Asian Jewish identity. We did kind of a panel discussion with Lunar. Then not too long after that, somebody reached out to me from the Lunar leadership and said, hey, we're doing our first in-person event in Los Angeles. Do you want to help organize it? I said, yes. And that led to a wild ride in which Vanessa and I are community leaders of the Los Angeles Lunar Hub.
Excellent. And that's a perfect segue into Vanessa. Vanessa, are you ready for the 1-minute Bad Jew challenge?
I am.
Excellent. Go for it.
I will first say it is kind of fun to be an LA community leader as someone who is not in LA. I'm actually from Orange County. I would say born and raised, but I was born in China and I was adopted to American parents. I actually have an interfaith family as well, just like some of the other folks here. My mom's side is Ashkenazi, they're Romanian. My great grandmother came to the United States from Romania. And then on my dad's side, they're American Midwestern Christian. So it I a very fun mix growing up of all the different holidays. Both my parents were pretty secular, so I didn't really know that Christmas was about Jesus until I was in middle school. That never occurred to me. So exploring kind of more the religious side of Judaism as well is really fun. In college, I studied history. I was a history major. I have a teaching credential, and that's actually my full-time job is being a history teacher. And I also write screenplays and was very involved in film. Throughout college, I worked on sets, Netflix, Apple, miscellaneous sets throughout LA. So I have that background, but I ultimately am focusing more on the writing and development as alongside my teaching versus being on set. It's very fun, but man, those 15-hour days get you.
I bet. I bet. Well, this is an incredible team right here. We have the A team of organizations for sure. And I'm really enthused. Y'all also come from incredibly diverse backgrounds and all have different stories. And I love that. No two are the same. It's really amazing. Let's also talk about what Lunar is, because I think all of you mentioned this organization called Lunar. Let's bring that into the forefront of the discussion here. What is Lunar?
Maryam, you want to take it away?
I do. So the Lunar Collective is the first and only organization for Asian American Jews. We were started by two college students during the pandemic, Jen Slosberg and Jenny Rudolph, who found each other online and reached out and were like, oh my God, are you an Asian Jew? I'm an Asian Jew too. That's so crazy. And wanted to just connect and had the idea kind of in that early pandemic stage of trying to be productive and put something out there. Like maybe we can find some other Asian Jews online and see if we all want to hop on a Zoom. And they put out a casting call just on their own personal social media, like Facebook. And over 50 people responded who are Asian Jews. And it became this, oh, wow, I think that we're onto something. And they ended up recording over a few days interviews with those Asian Jews. They picked a cast of like 20-ish people. And that became Lunar, the Asian Jewish Film Project, of which there are now 2 seasons that you can find on YouTube and on our website. So Lunar started off as a film series, and more Asian Jews kept coming to the page and engaging and wanted to start a Discord and wanted to start a WhatsApp. And it became like a, hey, is anyone in New York? Do you want to get boba? Hey, is anyone in the Bay Area and you want to take a hike? People really just wanted to connect with each other, which serendipitously was also how I found Lunar. I was talking to an Asian Jew through Moisha House, which is where I live. It's a Jewish community house. And they were telling me about Lunar. And I just couldn't believe that there is an Asian Jewish organization. And I was like, does anyone want to meet up and get involved? And from there, I saw they were hiring a community organizer and stepped in to really think about what programming could look like for the first time. Because it was still the pandemic. It was like 2021 when I came in and we were merging. So we did small group gatherings, we did mass gatherings, we did virtual gatherings. And then it became as more and more people started to join us. And we realized not only is this community more than 50 people and more than 100 people, but it's thousands of people across the US. We realized that we had to kind of meet that need and meet that momentum. And so we rebranded last fall into the Lunar Collective. So now we're a multifaceted organization for Asian Jews. We have a rabbi in residence, Rabbi Mira Rivera, who's very much the mother to our community. And she's the first Filipino ordained rabbi. We have community hubs, which David and Vanessa so fearlessly lead in LA, the Bay Area, and New York, as well as emerging hubs in Boston, Chicago, and DC this year. And we have other visibility initiatives. So we have 2 Haggadahs. The first is like a zine, and the second is a fully fledged ritual text by 17 Asian Jews. We also have a Nagoon now, and we're working with the Braid on an Asian Jewish theater show. So it's a little bit of everything you want for Asian Jews we have, which is so exciting.
Wow. Well, what an incredible community you all have put together. It seems like you all are doing so much, and I'm really moved by this. The thing is, if you look at general pop culture, right? And we can blame Fiddler-on-the-Roof and other forms of media for this, right? When you see movies and TV show representation of a Jew, an Asian person is not the first person you think of. You think of all the Fiddler-on-the-Roof-looking characters who pop up. You know, if I were a rich man, you know, whatever it is, right? You think of the Tevios, you think of the Laser Wolves, but the Asian Jewish story kind of is covered by that. And the movie industry hasn't done much to move the masses in that. And there isn't much coverage outside of that. So thank God Lunar exists. I really love what you all are doing. It's really a blessing. I want to tell you all a quick story. The other day I was at Ralph's. There's a Ralph's right around the corner from me. And I had a really great day. I just got a really good workout in, and I was wearing a tank top. And my tank top, by the way, wasn't just any tank top. It happened to be the merch for my this podcast, and it says Mazel Tov on it, right? And I'm walking around and I'm listening to music. I'm kind of bouncing around listening to music. Turns out there's another guy. He's Asian. We're walking down the same aisle. And he has headphones on. He's really bumping to the same music as well. And sooner rather than later, he locked eyes with me. We had this awkward moment where I'm embarrassing myself. And he kind of stopped. And I said, no, dude, keep going. You rock. Like, I loved his energy. He was just vibing. I was vibing. We start talking. He sees my kippah. He sees my tank top. And he's, oh, you're Jewish? So am I. And I'm like, what? Cool. And he's like, yeah, my Hebrew name is Yaakov, I think is what he said. I'm like, no way. I'm like, dude, my Hebrew name is Hanan. We start talking, and he wanted to know more about the Jewish community in LA. So he's someone that I'm going to introduce to you guys,
We
but
got another one.
he's from the Bay Area. Anyway, just a really cool guy. Seemed like he had a lot of talent, a lot of great energy. And I think there's just, you guys exist, but the world doesn't treat you all like you exist. And I was wondering if you could tell the world, who are the Asian Jews?
That's a great question. What you describe is really true. I remember growing up thinking I was like a weird aberration, like a sort of a feathered fish, if you will. And I've heard this from many people. I think was Vanessa, you said something about thinking you were the only Asian Jew
I think most of us thought we were the only one.
world. And so it was amazing to connect with Lunar, but also amazing. I've learned since then, there have been Jews in Asia. First of all, Israel is part of the Asian continent, and they've moved over to, we know that they moved to Babylonia, to Persia, all the way to India, all the way. But there were Chinese Jewish communities as early as maybe the 700s or even earlier. And they form thriving communities. And the Kaifeng Jews are still a population there we actually have one of them in our Lunar community who emigrated to the United States. But there were Jews and documented evidence of Jews, for example, in China. There were Indian Jewish as early before there were Jews in Lithuania, which is where my Jewish ancestors are from. There were Jews in India, these historic communities. So it's amazing to learn that we're actually not that weird. If you look at the history of Judaism, like you said, it's just in the narrative that's been told about what a Jew looks like that's framed the idea of what's normal. But actually, Asian Jews are not a new thing. My friend Lulu Fairman, who I just got a chance to introduce to Maryam, she grew up in Calcutta in a Jewish community, and she thought everybody was an Asian Jew. That's what Jews are. They're Asians, right? Only when you come to America, you're like, oh, Jews are something completely different here.
Right. So that's actually a really great distinction, because the only other time I had ever heard, me personally, of Asian Jews was the Hong Kong Jews. And that was because there were only two ports available to Jews trying to leave Europe right before the Holocaust. And I think one of them was Hong Kong. And where was the other one?
Shanghai.
Shanghai. And Shanghai did accept them or didn't accept them?
Yeah. Shanghai did. That's a whole other story to get into. Even though it was technically under a Japanese occupation at the time, which led to the complicated relationship of the Axis powers and all that. That's also started to become touched upon in media, but that's a whole other.
So interesting. But that's so interesting though, because Israel is technically in Asia. So does that mean that Israelis are Asian?
I was going to say, technically, anyone from the Asian continent is Asian. However, in the United States, the way that racial lines have been drawn, they would not be considered like East Asian. They would be considered like Middle Eastern, which the United States, I don't believe, even designates as a race as a whole on like census forms and stuff like that, as far as I'm aware.
The census forms are very haphazardly put together. It really feels like they took the most ignorant person and they put him in there. I know Persian people have to put that they are Caucasian, even though they are not, which is the most mind-boggling concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of census forms they don't actually account for these types of, you know, instances where people don't fall along American racial ties and American racial lines.
Yeah. At Lunar, we like to allow people the chance to self identify. That feels important to us. A lot of people who are Baharian Jews have different understandings of whether they're an Asian Jew or not to depend on their own lineage and how that's traversed. I think the same would be for Israeli Jews. I think at a certain point, if you come to our community and you hear our stories, whether that feels like your story or not, and therefore we will give you the chance to self identify. But outside of that, when it comes to what makes an Asian Jew, on top of what David said, that's so true. We found at Lunar, our community, also because we're American based. We only operate right now in the United States. We are a large part of us are mixed race. A large part of us are adoptees. A large part of us are Jews by choice, people who found Judaism and found a home in it. And then it becomes the people who come from Asian Jewish tribes with a really beautiful lineage. Yeah, as David said, because I'm so used to talking to people who grew up in the US and thought that they were the only Asian Jew. And I was chatting with Lulu and her story in Calcutta, also because I've spent a lot of time in India, but I've never seen a Jew. I was like, so you didn't know any other? She was like, no, everyone I knew is Jewish. I went to Jewish day school. I got tutored in Hebrew. And I was like, in India, bro. I just continue to be so amazed by when I'm learning about Asian Jews and how many of us there are out there and all the stories that we have. It's incredible.
Beautiful. I was going to say, you brought up something that I'm really glad that you did, which is that I think the second assumption comes with an Asian Jew is that all Asian Jews must be adopted. And of course, you said there's a large number, but that's not the case for all Asian Jews. I was wondering if Vanessa could speak to that.
I think part of it is that for a lot of people, like, people always want to rationalize things. Like, your brain is constantly trying to figure out problems for you. And that goes back to our evolutionary ways of just, we're always calculating and looking at problems. So, inherently, if you are mixed race, you are two things or multi things. And your brain does not like to do that. The brain wants to put you in a category. So, it's easier a lot of times for the brain to say, maybe they were adopted. I will say that there was a study done that said that Jewish couples were more likely than average in America to adopt than any other.
Really?
Yes, and I don't know precisely why that is. There is someone in our community, like, adjacent right now, who's a doctor and doing research in the adoptee space and he is the one where I heard that from. But I I do see that people often assume adoption because it's just, like, the easiest thing, and pretty much everyone that I've met in the Jewish community knows someone who was adopted, whether they were Asian or they were white. I think Jews overall, if that statistic is holding true, if they're more likely to adopt, that's just what's gonna make logical sense to people.
And how does that make you feel?
I think it's very interesting. I don't think I have any strong reaction either way. I do think values of Judaism definitely play a part in this. I feel like Jews don't have the same narrative around adoption because growing up, having been adopted, I met many other people, and many were from Christian families where they have a very different narrative surrounding adoption. And I feel like it's different in Judaism. It's not like a call, like God does not call you per se. I've never heard a Jewish family describe that. I've heard many Christian families describe it that way. But something I think innately in Jewish culture, there's something about, you know, I mean, in the Orthodox traditions and in the more, kind of religious traditions, there is literally a ritual for adopting a child to ensure that they are considered Jewish. And
Mm.
so, because that the religion has built into that too, a way to guarantee that if you adopt a child at birth or as a baby, that they will be considered Jewish. There's something. I'm not a history of a Torah or like Jewish history, but there's something there that lends itself to this idea that adoption is like encouraged route for Jewish families.
Vanessa, thank you for sharing that. It's really special. I think I really just appreciate just how willing you are to speak on that subject matter, sensitive it can be depending on the person. I wanted to ask David, where does the name Lunar come from?
So if you look at a lot of Asian calendars, they are lunar calendars. That's why if if you hear, it used to be called Chinese New Year, and then a lot of other communities pointed out that, hey, we also celebrate New Year at the same time. So now if you go to events that used to be called Chinese New Year events, they'll be called Lunar New Year events because it's the lunar, it follows a lunar calendar. Well, who also has a Lunar New Year is us, Jews, So it became very natural for Lunar to say this was something that we both have in common, this lunar calendar, and it represents how we are both 100% Asian and 100% Jewish. It's not, there's can be this language of like half-seas, or people have asked me weird questions. Are you more Asian or more Jewish? This is about embracing the intersection of both of those identities. And then as we picked this name, it came to stand for so many other things about, the phases of the moon, how as it transforms, the different way, the pull of the tides and the push and pull of connections of community, how we all kind of exert a pull upon each other. And so it came to stand for so many other symbolic things. It's interesting to hear Vanessa talk about being an adoptee and to think, okay, so Maryam's gone to India. I've gone back to China, to Hong Kong, where I grew up. My dad, both of us have fathers who are in that community who cook the food. Vanessa, somebody were to look at this Zoom, this podcast and look at the people here, they might say, well, Vanessa looks the most Asian because she's got, biologically 2 Asian parents. And yet she was raised outside of those sort of cultural traditions. And so she brings her own kind of experience as an adoptee that's different from my experience as a mixed race person. Also going to be different from our friends and members of our community who are Jews by choice or who grew up in historic Asian communities. So it's that the multiple phases of the moon represents the kind of the multiplicity of, Asian Jewish identity.
I would
Fascinating.
also add to that we're all under the same moon, right? So, the Jews looked up at the sky and were like, that orb, that's what we want to base our life around. And then people in Asia, the Asians looked up at the sky and they were like, that orb, let's base our life around it. And so it's a nice bridge. Everyone looks at the same sky.
That's a really cool concept. Maryam, it looked like you were about to say something.
It was just funny that David said that because I was literally thinking the same thing. As he was talking, I was like, there's so many ways that being an Asian Jew shows up. And at Lunar, we've really never tried to say your Jewish journey has to look like this or your Asian journey has to look like this because it presents so differently. There's so many facets to it. And, I'm really lucky to have such a wonderful Indian family. And I go almost every summer and have a deep connection to my fatherland. And also, I don't deal with the same racism or perception as other people in the community. There's so many different ways that we are Asian. Some people speak the language, some people don't. Some people come to Lunar Passover and they're like, are we going to daven before the Seder? And this food doesn't meet my level of kashrut. And then some people are like, I've never been to a Passover Seder before. This was my first one. And it's so beautiful that we get all of those people. And in that same way, yeah, lunar is that encompassing term that we're all under the same moon, I think is really beautiful.
That's really beautiful. And I think that something that Lunar sounds like it's really strong in is the free will factor that I think is so important when it comes to your Jewish learning experience. I very much resonate that with, I personally resonate with that. So I think that's really, really neat. I wanted to ask you all this one question I had a thought on, which is when it comes to the story of Asian Jews, what is one thing you wish more people knew about you?
I would say for me that I remember I was once in a job interview and somebody's who was Jewish and not, not an Asian Jew, was a European or white or however you want to describe the Jew, said when he learned that I was both Chinese and Jewish, said, oh, that must be really hard, right? That, that somehow that's a combination that wouldn't work. And I I am on the board of a synagogue. I work for a Jewish storytelling nonprofit. I do so much stuff in the Jewish world. Being Asian is not an obstacle to embracing my Jewish identity. And again, because there is a history of Jews being a part of these cultures across Asia, being Jewish is not an obstacle to being fully Chinese. People, I think, assume that this combination is inherently impossible to make work sometimes. And yes, it presents challenges. I think all of us are many different selves, whether racially or other ethnically or other things in addition to our Jewish identities. And sometimes there's challenges and conflicts, but it doesn't mean that we can't be fully present in both communities.
Thank you for sharing that. Miriam, what about you?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing that happens in the US that doesn't quite exist in Israel or some other more global Jewish communities, where when people see someone that isn't the Tevia or the more assumed Jewish person, it's like an immediate, well, why are you here and what are you? And I need to figure this out. That's really unique to Jewry in the United States. And I went on a Jews of Color trip in Israel 2 summers ago, and it was so beautiful to watch everyone just exist on the street and people say Shabbat Shalom and like welcome in, and no one was asking them these questions. And that was a really moving, joyful, and painful experience for those people to realize that that had been such a big part of life. And I'm hoping through making our community visible that you'll follow us on Instagram, you'll look at our web series, you'll hear our stories, you'll understand us better. And I think that'll start to break down some of those preconceived notions, and you'll run into someone who's an Asian Jew and you'll be like, yeah, of course. Then it won't seem so crazy.
Thank you.
So
Thank
come
you.
on in.
Yeah, beautiful. And Vanessa, how about you?
I think the biggest thing, this is almost something I wish I'd known about maybe myself when I started this. Like, I don't remember being asked, like, hey, do you want to be a volunteer? I don't even remember how that came about. Next thing I know, I was like driving all these tables to set up Passover Seder. And so I don't even remember that. So for me, I feel like sometimes when you step into this type of work, like my background is not in community organizing. That was never a plan in my life. But when you step into this work, a lot of people, you have this idea you want to do X, Y, and Z and change the world in A, B, and C ways. And I feel like over the last year, and maybe this is just me getting older and becoming a teacher and working with students and stuff, is I really see every event that we go to, I am so happy when everyone comes. But I think for me, the most special thing is when I see parents, kids, or kids on the way. Because what we are doing here is we are ensuring that those Asian Jewish kids will not feel like we felt. We have ensured that just by Lunar existing, that they will not, because they will grow up knowing that they're Asian Jews like them. And I think that, to me, like, I wish more people understood that it's not even about, like, it's great to find community where you are, but essentially what it is, it's like securing a future for these kids who are going to grow up and say, I can be Jewish and I can be Asian. Because for most of us, we didn't have that. The fact that we're here is we lucked into it and probably had a desire to connect with Judaism. If you're a kid and you feel like it's uncomfortable or you don't like, that kind of situation, you're just never going to accept that you're Jewish, or you're never going to accept that you're Asian. You're just going to move on in life. But because we have these events where we have young families and we have kids, like the next generation is like secured. And I think that's really cool.
That's really beautiful. And may the next generation be stronger than ever. That's so exciting, really. I have a few more questions for y'all. And something that occurred to me is that when you talk to any Jew, typically that comes hand in hand with the Zionism and that affinity that we feel toward the land of Israel. Do Asian Jews feel that in the equivalent level? Or is that mindset towards the origin of the country that they are from?
One thing I have definitely learned, especially I mean, I know, but it was brought home post October 7th. There is no uniform opinion on Israel, on the situation. And that's very much just like any other Jewish community, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There are
Yeah.
some Asian Jews who feel a deep tie to, first of all, there are Israeli Asian Jews. One of them is actually, sadly, one of the hostages. We saw some information about her in one of the videos released. She was the subject of one of the videos this very week. So there are Israeli Asian Jews. And then there are other people who feel a deep affinity. There are people who don't feel any connection the same way. There are people who, who are European descended Jews who say they don't feel any connection to her. They're anti-Zionist or however they want to describe themselves. And there's people who feel all those spectrums in between. And we encounter them in our community. And we try to make space for everyone. I think it's sometimes challenging when opinions are very heated. I actually don't think there's a much difference between the Asian Jewish community's response and their feelings about Israel and what I observe from just the general Jewish connection or response or feel about Israel. Like anecdotally, I'm still also like younger people can be it's a more diverse, opinion set sometimes, but even older people, there are people across the spectrum on it. And that's just replicated I would say, in Lunar.
Yeah, David said that well. The only thing that I would add is that for Asian people also, we have multiple homelands. So that feeling of a homeland, I think, may present differently just because of the fact that we come from a lot of places.
Yeah. I think that diversity is really wonderful.
I think it's also interesting, just anecdotally, what you said about homelands. There are a lot of Asian people, just anybody who's from different areas where they don't actually have a very comfortable relationship with the government who's currently ruling. You see this with Persian Jews, right? Or Cuban Jews. They don't really like the government ruling. So they feel this weird push and pull sometimes between loving the culture and being very upset at the government, right?
And I
That,
think,
yeah.
oh, sorry.
And I was going to say that is both something some Jews feel very connected to Israel and actually feel like they have to be advocates for the policies. And some people are like, I really feel a connection to like Israel or Jews, but I really can't stand the government. And I think that's, to me, I've also seen that as a model. Like those two things, how you feel about the country and how you feel about the people ruling it can be two distinct things.
Well said.
Yeah, and I was just going to add too that we see this a lot with diaspora Jewish groups, like the ones where I read this article recently of, I think it was 4 or 5 Kaifeng Chinese Jewish women who moved to Israel and became citizens. And it's, well, of course, like the Chinese government at this time does not recognize Jewish as a religion in the country. If you want to be Jewish, your best bet is to move. And then for others, like David said, if you don't have that pressure, like you're probably less likely to make aliyah and like to move when where you are is very much more accepting of being Jewish.
Amazing. And I think something that you all kind of did that as well. This thing kind of interesting, anti-Semitism and the response to that is in that it's very inherent amongst Jewish people. And there's also the need for solidarity in this time. When Asian hate crimes were up, there was a huge call to end Asian hate. And, whether or not the activism worked is one thing, but I'm very curious if the solidarity, do you feel that from the non-Jewish Asian community towards Israel right now? Of course, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, one world, millions of trolls. That's not really smooth off the tongue expression, but I'm very curious, what kind of response have you seen from the broader Asian community to October 7th and general anti-Semitism?
I can go first. So I'm gonna preface this by saying most of my experiences with other Asian orgs has been like filmmaking orgs. So I think that's there may not be like the most inherently political groups because it's mostly just people being like, can you read my screenplay? And I would say overall, I haven't actually noticed that much political organizing in any one direction at all. And I think that might be more indicative of the fact that it's a like screenwriting and like Hollywood stuff. So everyone's just more concerned about the writer strikes. And then also I would say that, perhaps in a lot of these communities, I'm not sure that they're the most like politically active in the way that like Jews would see being politically active would be. I hear a lot more like there it just isn't quite as like outspoken and as a parent, so I haven't actually really heard that much from the Asian community either way, at least in the community I'm in. And again, that might also be that maybe there's not a lot of knowledge for a lot of communities. This isn't, a forefront issue.
To wrap up this podcast, I want to end on a happy note. There's something really cool. Next time I head to New York, one thing I'm definitely going to be hitting up is this Japanese Jewish fusion restaurant. Have you all heard of this?
Shalom, Japan.
Shalom Japan. I need to hit up Shalom Japan. I just need to give a shout out. That's such a cool concept. And I just need to end on a positive note with that. The udon matzo ball soup sounds dope. I got to try that. That sounds really good personally.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one more to your list, by the
Yeah,
way.
please. Let's hear it.
The much talked about, I have not yet been there, but all the New York Jews talk about Buddha Bodai, which is Maryam's head for catering for Grace. It is
Okay.
a Orthodox, or it is a kosher, vegan, Chinese or Asian restaurant. Like they do a vegan kosher dim sum.
Ooh.
And it is really, like the Orthodox Jews all go there. It's really popular. So if you don't eat the pork and the shellfish, but you want to have some dim sum, this is the place to go.
Yeah, and
love-
Chaz, let us know when you're in New York. We'd love to have you at a Lunar event.
I
That'd be
would
super
love that.
fun.
It'd be really, really cool.
Yeah.
Well, David, Vanessa, Miriam, I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable and tolerating some of my more blunt, ignorant sounding questions. And I hope that I didn't come across too rashly. I want to thank the listeners for tuning into this podcast, for learning this with me. And I want to thank those in the Bad Jew WhatsApp community for participating and seeking out further diversity within the Jewish education here. This has been really a huge treat. And I want to thank Lunar as well. If you are interested in engaging with Lunar, be sure to go to weareasianjews.org and also follow them on Instagram at asian.jews. Lunar, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And for the listeners, we'll see you next week.
Shalom.